Brewers go crash landing into the All-Star break in Pittsburgh. Then they swing a couple of deals with the Houston Astros to bolster their pitching depth. A relevant discussion this week because we got a lot of questions about innings and how the Brewers are going to navigate the rest of the season. Plus, we do have a draft recap. We're not going to go crazy in depth because our good friend Spencer spent his entire weekend going in depth, but a recap of the Brewers picks and just a couple of takeaways to have on that front. It is the Brewer Fanatic podcast. See, I want to say this episode is going to be a little bit shorter because of the All-Star break, but I think we've learned by now, never assume.
Yes.
We'll see what happens, though. How are you, Spencer, though?
I'm doing great. Like you said, it was a busy weekend for me with the draft going on. And to be honest, when we go through these games in the Pirates series, I was half invested and half watching most of it. So I probably won't have a ton to add in that section. But otherwise, everything has been good. I've been talking about the draft on different podcasts the last couple of days. So we've got plenty of that out there. Like you said, we won't go crazy in depth. You can hear it on other podcasts. You can read about it on Brewer Fanatic. You can read about it on Backfield Brew. It'll be there somewhere if you want to find out even more. But I'm still going to end up giving more detail than I'm thinking I will right now. I can just promise you that, despite knowing how these things normally go. But yeah, everything else has been good. And I didn't like the heat and I don't like the smoke. And other than that, things have been good.
Well, fortunately, this show is being recorded indoors, so we don't have to worry about that for now. But yeah, it has been rough out there for the last couple of days. Going to be interesting at the ballpark to see what that's like over the weekend. Last I checked, it was supposed to maybe clear up Friday afternoon, but I don't know if that's happening. I'm kind of expecting they're just going to keep pushing this back and it's going to linger a little bit, but we'll see. You kind of touched on it with the Pittsburgh series. We're not going to talk about that a ton because I don't think there's actually that much to talk about. And there were a couple of more notable developments that took place both during and after that series. We'll start with the bigger news that's in the headlines right now. The Brewers actually making a couple of different trades with the Houston Astros. First, they acquired Braden Shoemake from the Houston Astros in exchange for cash. He takes Greg Jones's spot on the roster. He made a start in the Pittsburgh series, versatile infielder. Probably not a whole lot to talk about there. I would imagine he's not going to spend very long on the active roster as David Hamilton works his way back. Very early impressions on him. He is not a Brewers type hitter because he swings at literally everything. So without going too deep on him, I wonder if he's a guy who gets a little bit of run up here just out of necessity. And then if they get him back to Nashville, then I'd be more curious to see if they start working on the swing decisions a little bit because he did have a little bit of a prospect pedigree at one point.
Yeah, former first-round pick. Definitely was a guy who was pretty decently high on some lists for a while. Like you said, he is a very, very free swinger. Something they're going to have to probably try to work on if they are going to get much out of him. But I think the main point in this transaction is trying to get a lot closer to a replacement level player than Greg Jones while David Hamilton is out. So I think that was mainly what they were going for here. And then, yeah, I'm guessing, does he have an option? Is this like his final option year that he's in right now? Because I think he did spend time in the minors with the Astros this year, but that might not be correct. I don't have it in front of me.
So he is out of options, but I am wondering if he's a guy who they can maybe sneak through waivers after a period of time because he has bounced around a little bit already.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if he does get through waivers and ends up in Nashville, like you said, I think that would be definitely the way to go with him. It was a more talented player with Andrew Vaughn, but that was something that we kind of saw them work on when they brought him into the organization and put him in AAA. And part of it was just swinging less, I think, more than anything else. But yeah, maybe something comes of it if that does all happen. But more than anything, I still go back to they viewed it as an opportunity to get somebody who was closer to an MLB player than Greg Jones. And if they need it for however long David Hamilton is out, they'll feel more comfortable with him playing.
So I baited everybody a little bit by talking about the move that's in the headlines and starting with that one. The move that actually got a little bit more attention was Lance McCullers Jr. and Colton Gordon are now Milwaukee Brewers coming over from Houston a couple days later. The Brewers trading Jaden Fielder to Houston for those two players, plus a little bit of cash. They're going to be the Brewers are going to be paying, I believe, about $2.5 million
Yep.
of Lance McCullers Jr.'s salary, if I'm remembering the reports correctly off the top of my head. He's in the final year of that extension that he signed with the Astros several years ago, and that kind of coincided with some injury problems derailing the course of his career a little bit. Right now, the Brewers need innings, and the funny thing is you don't even know for sure if you're going to get that from Lance McCullers because he is currently on the injured list. He's rehabbing a shoulder injury. He has been pitching in the minor leagues. I believe he's made 3 rehab starts, and it sounds like his next outing could be a big league outing with the Brewers. But as we've talked about plenty on this show, the Brewers and counting on pitchers with bad injury history, recent bad injury history, they have basically not hit on any of those lately. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. But assuming that he is healthy and assuming that he will be able to pitch for them in the second half here, the question now is, what are they going to get out of him? So we got a question on Twitter asking, what would you consider the 20th, 50th, and 80th percentile outcomes in 2026 for the McCullers and Gordon additions? So I'm going to start with McCullers just because I think that's the guy that they probably have a better chance of getting more out of this year. I think Gordon is probably the guy that they maybe see a little more firm in, but for now, you're able to grab him and you're able to grab McCullers in that deal. So we'll start with McCullers. 20th percentile outcome is probably he's unpitchable because we are talking about a guy who has a nearly 7 ERA this year. 50th percentile, I am going to say is what he is right now and nothing really changes. 80th percentile outcome, I'm going to say they turn him into a league average innings eater for the rest of the season.
Yeah, pretty hard to argue with any of that. I think that's basically what you're looking at. And yeah, for a 50th percentile outcome, that doesn't feel great. Obviously, a guy who's had like a 6.5 ERA or whatever it's been this year and hasn't been able to stay out there very often. But there is at least some upside of an innings eater who has experience and has obviously pitched in some big games and still has some ability to spin the ball and to do some things with the secondaries, but not quite at the same level that we've seen him in the past, especially with commanding those secondaries. So yeah, I can't really disagree with any of that. I think that's just about right.
So the question now is, how do they get to that 80th percentile? Because I'm assuming that's probably what they're hoping to get out of him. Like I said, you have to temper the expectations knowing that he's not what he used to be, but I don't think he's completely cooked like the results would tell you. So you look at what he's done this year, he's still getting more whiff than the average pitcher. He still has I'm not going to say good ground ball rate, but a decent ground ball rate. And I did look this up. I wrote a story about kind of breaking it down and what I think they might try to do. I didn't include this part in there, but he has had one of the highest slugging percentages in baseball on ground balls. And I went through and I watched all the video of all the ground balls that were doubles. I think he's given up like 5 ground ball doubles this year, and he has not pitched much. So 5 ground ball doubles in like 8 starts is kind of a lot. I think guys are slugging like might be around 450 or whatever it was on ground balls against him, which is insane. There's a lot of ground balls down the line where Isaac Paredes probably should have gotten a glove on it, but did not. There's a couple where it wasn't Christian Walker playing first base. It was somebody else. I couldn't remember who it was, but he didn't get to it might have been Paredes again, actually, not getting to a ball down the line, goes for a double. There were a couple plays. Jose Altuve was a pretty big culprit as well. There were a lot of balls. I think I counted like 3. These didn't go for extra base hits, but like 3 ground balls that had a very low XBA or like an XBA of 300 or lower. And Jose Altuve somehow was nowhere close to the baseball because Jose Altuve can't move anymore at second base, and he really hasn't been able to move at second base for a long time. There's one play where he got like an 85-mile-an-hour ground ball, but it deflected off the third baseman's glove. It was not Paredes this time. It was one of their backup infielders. It deflected, like bounced off of his glove straight up in the air, like into shallow left. So that turned into a double. So you have a couple plays like that where if you put him in front of the Brewers infield defense, I would guess that he's going to probably fare a little bit better. His expected ERA is like 4.5 or somewhere in that range, which again is not good. That's still a little below average. But if you're getting a 4.5 ERA from like your 5 starter, that's very tolerable. Deserved run average, kind of the same deal. His deserved run average is about the same. It's actually slightly better than the league average deserved run average. So you can kind of see some signs that it's not good, but it's maybe closer to being usable than you might think from the results. I would guess that this is probably just going to be a pretty standard what the Brewers do with these kind of guys, where it's Chris Hook and Jim Henderson take one look at you and they decide, here's like one little thing we're going to change with maybe your tempo or the positions you're getting to so that we can get your arm on time at foot strike and your body is in a good position toward home plate. I did watch a little bit of video. Again, didn't put this in the story either, where it looked like he was not really in a consistent spot at foot strike when his front foot is hitting the ground. It looked like there were some times where he was kind of closed off a lot, or it looked like he was late and his arm was still like way back here. And then there were also a couple times where at foot strike, it looked like he was kind of yanking his front side a little bit and the glove was kind of pulling toward the glove side too much. So it just seemed like his arm wasn't in super consistent positions. He hasn't been on the mound a whole lot over the last 4 years now, really. And when he has pitched, it just looks like he's been constantly tinkering with things. The arm slot's kind of been all over the place. He's been starting in different positions on the rubber. He's done some different things with the arsenal. I would guess, like I said, the Brewers are just going to kind of tell him, like, they're going to talk to him, obviously, but kind of give him a clear roadmap of, here's the kind of pitcher that we think you should be at this point in your career. And it's probably going to be, like I said, maybe that small little mechanical change. And then Spencer's going to love this part. Throw more fastballs.
Yep. I know that's what's going to happen, so I'm just going to try not to fight it, but I'm prepared for it. I'm not going to love it, but I'm fully prepared for it.
The only reason I can be kind of okay with it this time is because he's not throwing the breaking stuff very competitively. I don't know. This is what I did put in this story. Like his percentage of curve, like the curveball is not getting hit. It's still getting like a ton of whiff when guys are swinging at it. But the amount of pitches on curveballs that he has thrown in the waist zone, so pitches that are so far off the plate that they're just not going to tempt a hitter to swing at all, that's like doubled, basically. More than doubled from his peak and doubled from last year when he wasn't good already. It's like a quarter of his curveballs are in the waist zone, and you're just not going to get a whole lot of positive results from that. So looking at every pitch that he throws, his cutter and his sinker are the only 2 pitches now that are not in the blue in the negative for run values. So would not shock me if they take that route. So far, he's been mostly sinker sweeper to righties this year, and then it's been more cutter changeup and some curveballs to lefties. I'm just kind of seeing a world where it's just sinker cutter to everybody.
Yeah, I could definitely see it. I think if you get yourself in spots where you can try and get some chase with the breaking balls, that still would make plenty of sense. But yeah, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt that that's the way they'll go. Now, maybe if what you're talking about with some of the late arm stuff and everything else, now if they can clean some of that up, it's possible that the breaking ball does become something that he can command a little bit better again, and maybe things go back to not, again, what he was doing in his prime, but I will always remember that he finished that World Series out with 21 straight curveballs.
Oh, that's still like one of my favorite pitching performances to watch. I watched it again when I wrote the story. I even linked it in the story. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's awesome. It was awesome. I loved McCullers when he was in his prime. Like, that was one of my favorite guys to watch in the league. So it's cool that he's a Brewer now for that reason. But yeah, it's not the same type of pitcher. It's definitely not the same type of stuff. The command is gone, and he's just not been able to stay healthy, unfortunately. Now, I am curious if he was always a guy who was seen as like a really good athlete on the mound. I wonder if he was always kind of fighting some of the mechanical stuff and just able to make it work by being a great athlete. And over time, that led to some of these injuries. So again, maybe one of the things that Chris Hook and Jim Henderson are fantastic at is figuring out how to just get guys into the right spots and help them be the best version, use the best version of their athleticism to kind of get them to those spots. So if he can stay healthy enough and they can work on some of that, and maybe that does lead again to the breaking ball becoming a little bit more useful like it has been in the past. But I agree with you. I think we're going to see a lot of cutter, a lot of sinker. And it's hard for me to argue with it. Like I said, I am certain there are going to be games where I'm going to be getting frustrated while he's pitching. Hopefully I am, because honestly, that would be good. That would mean he's healthy and pitching. And that's part of the equation here, is just getting him out there and hopefully helping eat some innings. But if he is out there, I'm sure there are going to be some games where I get annoyed with it. But in the end, I will understand it for the most part, unless, like I said, it comes around and he starts to throw them well. And when he does mix them in, they look good and they look competitive, and then I'm going to want them to use them more. But for now, given what we do know, it's hard to argue with that approach if that's what they do end up going, the route they do end up going.
Colton Gordon, like we mentioned, is the other piece in this deal. 27-year-old lefty. Interesting arsenal. I don't know if I would even necessarily say good arsenal. This feels like someone that the Brewers think there's a lot of upside in, but I don't know if I see all of the upside. He does kind of play some interesting angles with how he throws the fastballs, but right now he's just run into a lot of home run problems. The four-seamer has not played great because he does throw from a lower slot, but he's a taller guy, so he's not really creating a super flat angle on it. He's got a sinker that's kind of different from the four-seamer, but not super different from the four-seamer. There's a cutter, there's more of a sweeping slider. It's you showed me the pitch plot right after the trade, and they do kind of blend together a little bit at times. So I'm not entirely sure what exactly they're going to try to clean up here, but this is just going to sound like a hunch on my part, I guess. But this feels like an arm where they think there's maybe one or two tweaks here where all of a sudden he's going to be able to mix pitches really well, I think, attack different areas of the zone, find different ways to get off the barrel. And it's probably going to start in Nashville for now as well.
Yeah. I think the most interesting part for me is that they are going to have him start while he's in Nashville too, not come out of the pen, because I wondered if there was going to be any help that he would bring this year, if it would be out of the pen, given, the lefty concerns that there are currently with Ashby struggling and Koenig not looking great off the IL, and DL Hall still coming off the IL, and Rob Z still struggling to get healthy. And we talked so often, like Zerpa, all these guys, like we talked at the beginning of the year about how many lefties might be in the pen. And right now they don't really have a good lefty or one performing well in the pen right now. So I thought maybe they might look at him in that role, but it sounds like he's going to start. And that doesn't mean he couldn't come up as a reliever at some point. But yeah, it is interesting. I know that the default thing now is for everyone to say that he should move to the first base side of the rubber. I do think that there might be some validity to that, just helping him with some of the tunneling stuff that he has with all these pitches, and helping him kind of play the angles that you mentioned a little bit more. Like, I could see that being a help to him. I would imagine you mentioned the pitch plot, and I don't know what changeup he throws, but my guess is it's some sort of splitter, given how wide that pitch plot was and how all over the place they are. It seems like those are usually synonymous with splitters, because they can sometimes slip and have weird shapes and cut it, and sometimes it just does different things. But it was just kind of a big blob of all the pitches, which is not normally what you want to see. You want to see at least a little bit of space between each pitch, and a little bit tighter shapes between each pitch. So I'm sure they think they can get some of that out of him. Maybe they cut one of the breaking balls out of the equation. Maybe they take the two seam out of the equation, or the sinker, which wouldn't be very Brewers like, but sometimes they do it. And yeah, it will be interesting. The only weird thing I would throw out, and they don't do this very often unless it's something that a player finds supernatural, but I do wonder if he would be like, if they feel like he could drop the arm a little bit more and start to become more of like the Brian Hudson type of deal, where it's a really low slot, pretty far out on the horizontal release, lower vertical release, help some of the stuff play up. But again, that would have to be completely dependent on, they don't just switch arm angles. They'd need to feel like it's kind of a natural thing for Colton. But yeah, I don't know exactly where they go with this. Like you said, I think they believe there's a couple tweaks here. I'm guessing they do move him on the rubber. I'm guessing they do either maybe take something out of the mix for now, or they think they can make one of them bigger and separate further from the group or something like that. But I think they can tunnel all this stuff. I know Matt Arnold talked about liking the secondaries. So I'm sure they believe they can just kind of tunnel all this stuff off of each other if it's done correctly. And that's the way they're planning to go with it. I'm just curious to see what the rest of the equation is for kind of getting to that point.
Mm-hmm. I would guess probably east-west is how they want it to play, because the four-seamer has been the one that's allowed a ton of damage. So last year it gave up 13 homers on four-seam fastballs. This year he's already given up 3 homers on four-seam fastballs. And for reference, 13 homers on four-seam fastballs in 86 innings last year. And then, like I said, already 3 homers on four-seam fastballs in 9 innings this year. So there seems to be a pretty clear culprit where a lot of the damage is coming from. The sinker shape is not, I wouldn't really call it a sinker. It's more of like a running two-seamer, but it does seem like that's gotten off of barrels decently. And I do wonder if, because he can be a little crossfire, and it's not a crazy low slot, but it is lower, like getting down the mound, kind of crossfire. Like, I do wonder if just the angle of that two-seamer makes it look like it's actually running even more than maybe the raw movement numbers are telling you it is. So I would guess there's going to be, it's probably going to be a lot of like playing angles east-west. I could see them keeping that four-seamer, but that pretty much needs to be exclusively like we're going up with 2 strikes, because when he throws that literally anywhere else, that is the batting practice pitch.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned it, but it's like hovering right at the stock vertical approach angle of like -5 degrees. Like that's basically where he sits with it. And you mentioned it. It's in terms of like the raw shape, you texted me this and I'd actually said the same thing to someone else, but like it's not that different from like Kyle Harrison's shape in terms of like the horizontal and the induced vertical break. But he's throwing it from like 8 inches higher. The release height is quite a bit higher, because you mentioned he's 6'4" and pretty tall guy who gets decent extension, but he just doesn't get as far down the mound in terms of like the height as like a guy like Kyle Harrison does. So it just leads to this very, very stock, exactly what hitters are used to. Like -5 is basically where people talk about like that's what a batting practice fastball looks like out of a standard machine with nothing else going on. That's what hitters are used to seeing their whole career, their whole life, in terms of shape. And that's basically where his sits right now. So that is it's part of the reason I was curious on like if they feel he can drop the slot at all, if they would be interested in that, because I think it could help with the release height. And if he could hold the shape, it'd be kind of tough to hold the shape, but if you could get close to it, it'd be interesting. But again, I don't really expect them to do that, especially this year. Maybe that's an off-season project if they think he's capable of it. But he will be an interesting guy to follow this year. I kind of think they'd be content with him being in AAA and then working through stuff. And if they need him, they need him. But that's kind of how I'm viewing it. I don't know if you're the same.
I would guess that this is more of a 2027 acquisition and beyond. I don't think we're going to, unless something happens where something clicks very suddenly in Nashville, because as we'll talk about later on the show, they're going to need arms. They're going to need stretched out arms. But it just feels like some of the things you'd have to change here are hard to do in season and expect that it's all going to come together. So obviously that is a little easier to do in season in AAA than it is in season in the big leagues. But this one does feel to me like the part of the deal that is going to ultimately give you more value, or they think is going to produce more value. But I think the Gordon part of this is you're looking ahead more. I think McCullers is more of the Band-Aid that you're maybe trying to put on the back of the rotation for now.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And for McCullers, you don't have to give up much to get Gordon, who they seem to probably be pretty high on by eating some of the money, and then you get the extra upside of, well, maybe he gives you something that helps over the course of the second half, which you might need. So yeah, makes sense to me.
In return, the Brewers only giving up Jaden Fielder, Prince's son, whom they signed as an undrafted free agent. No, some people were not happy to hear this, but no offense to Jaden Fielder, just to be honest, like highly, highly unlikely Jaden Fielder is going to be a big leaguer.
Yes, he has no defensive home right now. In fact, he hadn't played defense in like a month. He had only been DHing. It's, I guess, to sum it up without going too in depth, like it's kind of a poor man's Tyler Black, and we've seen that the real Tyler Black is probably not a big leaguer. So the poor man's version is almost certainly not. But it's very heavy walk carrying the offensive profile. There's really no defensive home. Decent athlete, more raw power than you might expect, but it's probably not a big league player. I'll be rooting for him. I have heard genuinely nothing but great things about him as like a teammate in Wilson. Like everyone loves him down there, the team, the staff, they all loved him. So in that regard, like it's unfortunate whenever somebody of that higher character and like a good person leaves the organization, and I'll root for him with Houston, and it'd be awesome if he bucks expectations and somehow does make it to the big leagues. But in terms of what they're giving up here, it is very, very minimal on the prospect side of things.
A couple of quick injury updates here before we move into the Pittsburgh series. Brandon Woodruff was transferred to the 60-day IL. It was a pretty quick transition. I don't think that's surprising to anyone. We talked about a lot of that on last week's show. It sounds like the Brewers will have an update on what the outlook is on his shoulder over the weekend here as the homestand begins. But for now, that's the latest on Woodruff. I believe if I'm doing my math correctly, that means that the return for him would be September at the earliest. And even that seems like a little bit of a stretch right now. Yeah. So we'll see what the update is, but that is the paper move to put him on the 60. Kyle Harrison, he had some forearm tightness that he was experiencing in his last couple outings. The Brewers said that they were going to be careful with him, and then they transferred him to the 15-day injured list. They made it sound like that was more of a paper move because with the break, they were going to line things up to push his start back just to give him more extra time. He's said multiple times that he's confident the injury is not a long-term issue. He thinks that it already is starting to feel better. He's going to be back quickly. Again, we'll see, just because we've seen this movie before a little bit, but all reports for now are that it's a minor thing. Although anytime you hear forearm, elbow, that kind of area does get a little bit scary. Coleman Crow, however, did come back from his flexor strain, which is not quite what Harrison is dealing with, or at least not to the same extent, it seems. But Coleman Crow was able to come back from his forearm injury basically on about the timeline that they said. So we have seen it go favorably before. The Brewers optioned him to AAA after he completed his rehab assignment. So he's healthy. He's back pitching as a starter, and he is available as one of their options should they need him. Carlos Rodriguez, he is also on a rehab assignment, another length option in the upper minors. Rob Zastryzny, he was on a rehab assignment. The Brewers returned him from that rehab assignment and transferred him to the 60-day IL. Again, don't have a lot of word on him. We just know that he's been kind of dealing with this shoulder/back problem that's just kind of been all over, and they're struggling to pinpoint what exactly it is, where exactly it is, what exactly is causing it. And then finally, DL Hall, as we talked about, I believe, on last week's show, scheduled to throw a bullpen on Thursday. So we'll probably get some updates on Friday afternoon as to how that went. We can now jump into a rough weekend in Pittsburgh for the Brewers. It seems like this is a tradition where when the Brewers play the Pirates, leading into the All-Star break at PNC, or just PNC in general. It seems like most seasons there is at least one disaster series at PNC Park for the Brewers, and that's basically what this was. So we're not going to go into a whole lot of detail on it. The Brewers were a little shorthanded pitching wise compared to some guys who they might normally be throwing out there. The Pirates also have a decent lineup now, and I think they deserve a little bit of credit for that too. They're actually one of the top offenses in baseball this year, so even saying decent is probably underselling them quite a bit. But game one of the doubleheader, because the Brewers were originally supposed to begin the series on Friday night, but that game was rained out. So they played 2 on Saturday and then played on Sunday as well. Game 1 on Saturday, Pirates 7, Brewers 6. Brandon Sproat got the start in this one and was bad again. Basically just the same issue of spraying the baseball all over the place. Hit 3 guys, walked 2 guys, gave up 3 runs, 2 earned in 3 innings. The pitch count ballooned really quickly, just kind of all over the place. So seemed like we were seeing some progress from him, but now he's kind of stagnated again in these last couple outings. But again, with where the Brewers are at rotation-wise, probably going to continue to get some opportunities moving forward. Offensively, though, the Brewers were doing their part to give him some run support. Luis Lara, Cooper Pratt hitting back-to-back doubles that tied the game at 3, and then Sal Frelick homered to give the Brewers the lead, a 2-run shot to right for him. Unfortunately, the Brewers the entire weekend ran into the buzzsaw that was Esmeralyn Valdez. He drove in all 6 RBIs for the Pirates. The other run that they scored in this one scored on a Joey Ortiz error. That included, for Valdez, a grand slam off of Aaron Ashby, who was pitching with a 6-3 lead. That grand slam flipped things to 7-6 in the 7th, and the Brewers were unable to mount a comeback from that. Tough way to begin the series, and it wouldn't get a whole lot better for Milwaukee, as in Game 2, they lost 3-2. Shane Drone got the ball in this one, was fine. 6 1/3, worked into the 7th inning, 5 hits. Didn't issue any walks, which is a big one for him because he's another guy who has battled through some control problems better than Sproat has, but has had that issue a little bit with executing and finishing guys off and putting guys away. No walks, though, was nice to see from him. He did scatter 3 runs in those 6 1/3. Valdez again, striking against the Brewers, hitting a 2-run homer. Bryce Terang, however, tying it with a 2-run double before Brian Reynolds eventually gave Pittsburgh a late lead once again. So another game kind of getting away from Milwaukee there. But don't worry, in Game 3, there was no game to get away from them because this one got out of hand from the start. 14-5. The Pirates put a beating on the Brewers in this one. Robert Gasser got the start in place of Jacob Mizorowski, who was originally going to face off against Paul Skeens, but the Brewers pulled him from this start due to fatigue. Does not sound like he's hurt, and I would actually believe it this time because, as we'll talk about a little bit later with Miz, there's some innings concerns going on, and I think this kind of gave them a convenient opportunity to reset things. To be honest, if I'm putting on my tinfoil hat, I'm kind of wondering if he's going to make 3 more starts before the All-Star break thing was never actually going to happen, and they were just looking for a way to make sure that he was not eligible to pitch in that game.
Yep.
Because when you're talking about managing innings, the squeezing in 3 starts always seemed kind of odd to me. So I'm not too worried about this one. But Robert Gasser, starting in his place, did not do the job, allowing 7 earned runs across 3 innings, including a couple of homers. He threw strikes, I guess, but some of those strikes were a little bit too good. So the Pirates getting on him. Jared Koenig then coming in to try to restore order. That did not happen. Things actually got worse from there. Koenig did not record any outs. He walked 2 guys, gave up 2 hits. Basically just completely all over the place, did not have anything. So just a continuation of what we talked about last week, where he's rehabbed a sprained UCL, and between the rehab outings and now the big league outings, it's wildly inconsistent, both in terms of velo and where the baseball is actually going.
Yeah, he hit a guy in this inning too. So 2 walks and a hit by pitch and 2 hits allowed and not recording an out. All 5 of those runs came around to score. And Yeah, the first outing when he got back to the big leagues was really the only one where it was like, oh, okay. It kind of caught our attention. We were like, okay, maybe it was just rehab stuff. He didn't have the velo, and now he's back in the big leagues, and everything looks kind of fine. It has not gone that way since. It has been pretty rough in terms of both the velo and the command. And yeah, I don't know how long that leash is going to be. Now, it might end up being that he goes on the IL, or they choose to go a different route with the elbow or something. But I don't know how long you can let this version of Jared Koenig pitch in the bullpen, because it's not good. There's not much good here. And if it had been like, okay, he had one pretty interesting outing in that first outing, and then one down one, and then a pretty interesting one, and the down one, an interesting one, and then a really bad one, it'd be like, oh, okay, I can see giving him some more time. But it hasn't looked good outside of that first outing. And I think at this point, it's probably going to be a short leash coming out of the All-Star break. I don't know how long they'll give him if it looks even close to how it's looked so far.
Craig Yoho and Bryce Wilson were the only bright spots in this one on the pitching side. Yoho working another scoreless inning with a couple of strikeouts, and then Bryce Wilson back in Milwaukee to eat some innings out of the bullpen. 3 shutout innings with 4 Ks, so he's thrown the ball pretty well since he rejoined the Brewers, and basically went right back to using the pitch mix that he used the last time he was in Milwaukee, after he temporarily switched things up with the Cubs a little bit. Right back to sinkers and cutters.
Yeah, and I can't argue with it at all for Bryce Wilson. I think it absolutely makes sense for him, and we've already seen it work multiple seasons. Yeah, it feels like he kind of just fell right back into where he was before, and it won't surprise me if Bryce Wilson's just a solid innings eater out of the bullpen for the rest of the season for the Brewers. It would not surprise me in the slightest.
The bright spots offensively for the Brewers were Jackson Chourio and Garrett Mitchell hitting RBI doubles, plus a 2-run homer by Bryce Turang. But 5 runs is not enough to overcome 14 runs, so the Brewers falling in the finale as well to complete the sweep. Like I said, it's one series. I just don't care. I think a lot of people are going to try to read into this like, well, they have holes here and holes here and holes that, like, we're going to talk about that. Yes, they need a little more starting pitching now. Yes, they could probably use the bullpen shored up a little more. I don't know that this series in particular, though, actually reveals anything that we didn't already know.
Yeah, and I tweeted this out, but I didn't even include, like, it was the end of an 18 in 17 days stretch, with now 2 doubleheaders included in that. Obviously, they did get a built-in off day, but when there's a rain out where you're actually in the bullpen getting ready for the game beforehand, that's not an off day. That's a slightly less intense day, but they went through the whole pregame. They went through everything. In fact, it ended up probably being worse than if they would have just played Friday and then into Saturday. So that added even more to their table, or to their plate. And then they had to play 2 games on Saturday, and obviously 1-run losses in both of those. That's tough. In the end, this was an 11-game road trip to Arizona, St. Louis, and then Pittsburgh. They played 11 games in 10 days, and they went 6-5. Everything will be fine. They're going to be fine. I get that the last series and all of this was tough, and it was the first 2 games were frankly just competitive baseball games that Aaron Ashby kind of just struggled a little bit, gave up the grand slam to a guy who was clearly seeing the ball incredibly well on Saturday. And then game 2, they just didn't get enough offense. But like, those were competitive baseball games. They could have easily won either of those, and nobody would have batted an eye. Sunday was a tough one. Like, those don't happen very often to the Brewers, and that was obviously just a pure butt kicking from the Pirates. But again, that's at the very end, leading into the very end of that incredibly tough stretch, leading into an All-Star break. I don't normally excuse like completely letting stuff kind of slip in terms of intensity or focus, and I'm not even saying it did, but if it did happen on that particular day, I would have a hard time being upset about it or blaming them, that they could kind of finally taste the end of this stretch and an extended break, and that maybe things just got a little out of hand on that day. So yeah, I definitely don't really care. And again, in the end, if you just look at the whole view of the road trip, which is a tough road trip, they went 6-5. That's never going to kill you over the course of a season. That'll be just fine.
Well, as we come out of the All-Star break, we're entering the official second half of the season, even though we're actually more like roughly 2/3 of the way through the season, or a little less than that. But one of the storylines of the second half is going to be how the Brewers handle their pitching staff and how they handle innings and workloads, because this is always going to be one of the stories with this young rotation. How are they going to make that work? And several months ago, you probably could have said, well, they have so many starters that they can kind of give guys breaks. You can't say that anymore because they have a lot of guys who are on the shelf now. So we got a lot of different questions about this, basically all kind of asking very similarly, what are we going to do about the innings here? And the big guy that everybody is focused on more than anyone, obviously, is Jacob Mizorowski. So Ben on Twitter asked, how will the team manage the innings of Miz, Harrison, Sproat, Drowan? Miz is just 30 innings away from his 2025 total. If they increase by 20 to 25% from last year and intend to save some innings for a playoff run, how many more regular season starts do you see Miz making? So I did a little bit of the math, the rough math, before we started recording this show. And the way it shakes out right now, he's on pace to make about 30 starts this year. And if he averages about 5 innings per start the rest of the way, that basically puts him right on that 25% innings increase from last year. Is he going to average only 5 innings per start? I would guess probably not. So I think he's going to surpass that a little bit. But I think we're going to see them do things like they're almost certainly going to do coming out of the break, where he's probably going to start toward the back end of their rotation now. They're probably going to take advantage of some off days here to kind of manipulate the schedule, and maybe you can shave a start off that way by doing that kind of stuff without him ever actually missing any time. The other part of this that I don't think is being talked about a lot is I don't know if they're actually abiding by that 20 to 25% increase. Something tells me that they're actually very comfortable with him bumping up the innings beyond that, because his body is not the same as it was last year. He put on a lot of muscle, and you hear all this talk about how he's using his body so much better, and he's using his legs better, and he knows how to take care of himself. That doesn't just manifest itself in increased velocity and holding velocity, which we're obviously seeing, and we're seeing better execution and better performance, all that stuff. But that is also going to carry into what your body is capable of withstanding and what kind of workload you can withstand over the course of a regular season. So I'm assuming that based on the gains that he made, they actually probably feel pretty comfortable with him hitting that 25% increase or maybe slightly above in the regular season, and then still feeling like he can also give you some pretty good bullets in the postseason as well.
Yep, I am right there with you. I think the other thing, I don't know how important it is, because I do think ups are probably some of the more important part of the equation here. But I remember it was a couple weeks ago that someone was kind of pointing out that he was like at the same point in this many innings last year, he had thrown like 250 more pitches to get to that point too. So like him being so much more effective with his pitch counts, I would imagine that at least helps them feel a little bit more comfortable too, in terms of just the raw workload. Like I mentioned, I think innings and up downs are probably a little bit more important than raw pitch count. But when you combine the fact that I'm with you, I think they feel like he's a lot stronger. I think he's built for a bigger workload, and they can push that limit a little bit more. And you combine that with the fact that to this point, he's throwing far fewer pitches to get to this many innings. Like, I think they're going to feel pretty comfortable with it. And I think it's something where they'll obviously be safe if anything starts to pop up. They're not going to make him push through things or anything like that. But as long as he's feeling good and the stuff is still looking crisp and everything's just kind of checking out, I don't really expect them to do anything other than, like you said, manipulate off days, use this all-star break to give them almost like a full week and a half or a little bit longer to between starts, probably even closer to 2 weeks in the end. But do some of that stuff. But other than that, like I don't really expect like skipping starts. I don't really expect any of that stuff. I think they'll just manipulate the schedule a little bit to try and get them those extra days of rest, a day or two at a time. And then just feel comfortable with whatever is going on, as long as everything's checking out with the stuff and how he's feeling.
I hear a lot of chatter about this as well. If you just look on social media, anytime Mizorowski does something special, there's a lot of replies that are always saying, well, Tommy John incoming, arm injury incoming because he's throwing 104. And maybe, like, he is definitely pushing the limits of what the human body is capable of doing. But I I tend to feel better about the health outlook of the outlier velo guys than I would about maybe someone who was throwing 92 and now he's throwing 96. Because I think the outlier guys like Mizorowski, think of like Aroldis Chapman too. Aroldis
Yep.
Chapman has never had a major arm injury, and granted he's pitching out of the bullpen. It's definitely a different animal, but it's stressful in its own way in that it's not the same volume of innings, but he's doing it more frequently, like getting up and getting ready and doing all that stuff throughout the course of a season. And he's been doing that for like 15 years and has never had a major arm injury. I do think there is something to be said for the guys who are outliers, that their bodies are outliers. And
Yep.
I think they are just uniquely genetically equipped to actually throw the baseball that hard and hold up better than a lot of other pitchers would if they tried to do that. So you never know for sure if that's going to be the case, but I, I don't have like this crazy concern that because he throws 103, he's at like an insane risk of blowing out. In fact, I honestly think that he might actually be at a lower risk of blowing out than a lot of guys are, just because, like I said, his body is obviously capable of doing some things that a lot of other players' bodies are not capable of doing. And if he's doing it in the right way mechanically, I don't know if there actually needs to be a crazy high level of concern here. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just how I see it.
No, I'm with you. And Brent Suter needed Tommy John surgery like that. That was a guy throwing in the upper 80s at most. I would technically need Tommy John surgery if I ever wanted to pitch again, and I was in the low 80s. So this has nothing to do. I mean, it has something to do. Like you said, you are pushing what the human body and the human arms are capable of doing. But I'm with you. Like, I think some of these guys who are at the very high end of this stuff, there's a reason they can throw as hard as they do, and it's one, they get a ton out of the rest of their body. It's not just their arm doing the work. Like, I think he has some of the best mechanics in baseball, Miz. Like, I really do. I think it looks a little funky because he's so lanky and sometimes he still kind of falls off to the left side. But I want to say it was an Athletic article. It was Zach Wheeler talking to Don Mattingly, and it was probably during the middle of the insane Maddox game that Miz had. But Mattingly looked at Wheeler and said, man, he moves like you. And Wheeler said that he told Mattingly, like, I wish I knew how to move like that and how to, he was like, especially at that age, I had no idea how to use my body like that. And that's one of the better pitchers and a guy who obviously has come back from an injury himself and has figured out how to do things very well still. But I think around the league, like, people recognize that he is just moving at an incredible, the amount of quality movement he gets in his delivery. There's no wasted movement. There's no extra muscling up for this stuff. Like, it's all just, it comes from the lower half. It comes from the ground up. And a lot of it is just in the lower half. And the fact that the arm just follows through and he's got the extension, he's got everything else going for him. It all combines into this hard throwing righty that people think is an automatic injury. And like you said, it is not a guarantee that he doesn't get hurt. Like, it's almost a guarantee that every pitcher in MLB is eventually going to have an arm issue like that. Aroldis, as you mentioned, hasn't really had one, but he is a huge outlier in a lot of ways. Almost every pitcher is going to have one eventually, but the people on social media who that's all they can think about when they're witnessing this greatness on the mound and this insane stuff that's happening, and that's all they want to talk about is how he's going to get hurt. That, first of all, that's a ridiculous way to enjoy sports and entertainment. Like, why are you doing that? What are you gaining from that? Just enjoy something that you've never seen before. And two, I don't agree with them. I'm with you. Like, I don't think this is I think it's far from a shoe-in. I think it's something where I'd be a little bit more surprised if he did get hurt, and I hope he doesn't, and knock on wood, all of that stuff, because it would suck. But there's a lot of good going on here that leads me to believe that he can withstand all of this. And obviously there's a limit for everybody, and you can't just push him to suddenly 250 innings and he's going on 3 days rest in September, something like that would be ridiculous. But as long as you're smart with it, I think they can push it a little bit, and he'll be fine as long as they're taking in feedback and they're keeping an eye on how the stuff looks and the command and all of that stuff. But I don't think this is some foregone conclusion that Miz is going to have an injury just because he ups his innings more than maybe like the standard amount this year.
Kind of moving on to some of the other pitchers and where they're at with innings. Ben Lepak on Brewer Fanatic on the forums, he talked more specifically about some other guys. Kyle Harrison threw 112 innings in 2025, 124 in 24. He's already at 83. He touched on Miz again with the innings, but he also talked about Shane Drowan. He threw 54 innings last year, had injury issues in 24, and then he was around 120 innings in 23 and 22. He's already at 70. And then he's kind of asking, is getting up to 130 a reasonable jump for him? He talked about Brandon Sproat coming off a career high. He's at 82 innings. And he did say with Drowan, is there a possibility of acquiring a starter and then moving him back to relief to limit the innings? We've talked about it before a little bit, I think, last week. I do think that they could kind of kill two birds with one stone if they bring in another starting pitcher to take that spot, and then Drowan moves back to the pen. It allows you to manage his innings a little more. I think it allows his stuff to play up a little bit. I think it takes the pressure off of Aaron Ashby a little bit, who Ben mentioned in this post as well. Aaron Ashby has 107 innings in the last calendar year and totally doesn't look like a guy who's starting to throw fewer strikes and spray the ball around a little more after that workload, but I digress. I do think that would resolve a lot of your issues.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's honestly, when we talked about it last week, I think that was, in the end, it made the most sense for me. Like, if you can bring a starter in, put Drowan in the bullpen, you can fix quite a few problems with one single move. So, yeah, I do think that makes sense. And in terms of Harrison's innings, like, this IL stint might help save some of them, assuming everything comes out healthy on the other side. They might build him up a little bit as he comes back too, so that could save a little bit of the innings. But I think in the end, like, if you build him up at that 20 or 25%-ish increase, like, that's about what he'll probably hit if he's healthy the remainder of the season anyway. So the Brewers are never going to have a guy going absolutely wild in the playoffs in terms of a young guy, especially, like, usage. So if they throw an extra 25 innings or something, I think that's not going to be some huge issue at that point. So I'm not super concerned about it. I think they do have to be cognizant of it and aware of it with all these guys. And I think Drowan especially makes a lot of sense to move to the pen to save some innings. Maybe Sproat ends up in the pen towards the end, and that's, the stuff plays up a little bit in short stints, and maybe that's a role for him towards the end of the season to save some innings and to maybe give him a little bit more value if they have enough starting at the end of the year. But yeah, that's kind of how I look at it.
Kind of on that bullpen front, Sprawl 135 asked, is there any possible bullpen help in the minors from guys like Mark Manfredi, Tate Keener, Brett Witrowski, or even moving Tyson Hart into the bullpen at some point this year?
Yeah, Mark Manfredi is an interesting one to me. I think there's a real legitimate case that he should get a chance in the big leagues at some point this year. Keener's been hurt for quite a while now. I believe he got moved to the 60 days somewhat recently, although he's basically at 60 days already. So it's not like that means anything for sure on his season. And in the minor leagues, there is a full season IL. So if he is out for the year, they could just put him on that and we would know. Witrowski also on the IL right now. I don't really think he's a big league arm at the moment. I think he's got the capability of it, and maybe if they moved him to the pen in AAA, we could see how it looks in that role. He mentioned Cameron Wagoner too, who's still in AA, but I mean, the guy's touching triple digits with a nasty slider and pretty interesting spin rates and metrics on a lot of his stuff. I want him to go to AAA to see how it looks. I could see it at some point for him. Harden to the pen is an interesting one, though. I could see it. They're going to need a 40-man spot. They're going to need to feel very comfortable with saying he's probably in the mix for a starting spot next year, because I think that's when they would start to feel comfortable with bringing him up in that role, like we saw with Burns and Woodruff. And Freddie was kind of half in, half out of the rotation his first year or two. But I could see it. I could also see the velos ticking up out of the pen like we saw in college for him. He would touch upper 90s out of the pen at times. He doesn't hit that as a starter, but if he moved into that role, maybe we saw it a little bit. I think Manfredi and Harden are probably the two of that group that I think are most likely to maybe get a shot. Manfredi being lefty doesn't hurt either because we just kind of talked about all those struggles. But those would be the two I think have the best chance of this group.
We're going to move now into a little bit of trade talk because that is coming up, the trade deadline. Looks like we didn't get a ton of questions this year yet, although maybe they're going to start trickling in now. My least favorite questions of all time of what exact package would you put together for player X that you think is going to work? We didn't really even get that this week, though, which I appreciate. It was more along the lines of who are the kinds of prospects you'd be willing to deal, who are the kinds of players that you'd be looking at, which I think is a much more realistic way to approach things than trying to put together a specific trade package. So to those of you who sent in those kinds of questions, thank you, because you saved me a lot of headaches that I probably shouldn't even complain that much about, but I do anyway. Joey Weimer Truther asked on Twitter, who would you list as your quote unquote untouchable prospects in deals at the deadline this month? So the fact that he put untouchable in quotes probably means that he knows that there are no truly fully untouchable players, but in terms of realistic offers that you would get, guys who are just not going to be a part of that. Spencer, here, the prospect guru, so I'll let you go first. I think I have a pretty clear idea what the answers are going to be, though I think a lot of people will have similar answers.
I have one answer. It's Jesus Madej. That's it. That's the only fully untouchable guy for me. And again, we won't even do the qualifier, but if Bobby Witt Jr. is on the table or something, yeah, you trade Jesus Madej for him. I'm not moving a lot of these guys unless they are big deals, but if there are big fish out there, I can move Luis Pena and feel comfortable with it. Now, that's not a rental. Maybe I should tier it like that. Like, I'm not moving Luis Pena for any rental, but I would move him for a controllable player that might move at the deadline if that was available. Who else would I put in that tier? Probably, honestly, Josh Adamshevsky probably fits in that tier at this point. I won't include like Pena or Lara and Pratt are probably not moving at this point with the extensions being in the big leagues. I don't think they're moving. But like, there's only a few that I would say are fully untouchable for anybody, and they would, and then a couple others that would need to be absolutely controllable players. In terms of, I guess I'll stick with that. I think it's Made for anybody other than like the true superstar, which is not going to be out there. And then it's Pena and Adamshevsky as like the two guys that I really would have a very hard time moving for any rental at all, even the very, very top end of it. And then anyone else I could be talked into for the top end rentals. And then as you go down the list further, you can talk about, mid-level rentals. But yeah, I guess that would be where I'd land.
Then we got another question that was basically the opposite of that. Which top prospects are you most willing to part with and why? The one name that I'll throw out there is Jet Williams.
Yep.
I'm guessing you were probably going to say Jet Williams as well.
Yep. He would definitely be at the top of my list. And I still think there's like a conceivable big league player who could be a decent player at the big league level. But I think a lot of people are kind of catching up to him at potential third baseman. The fact that he hasn't been able to really force his way into the big leagues, the fact that Pratt has looked pretty solid in the big leagues, it just is kind of getting harder to find that role for him other than maybe a future utility type. And if you can kind of maximize or capitalize on the value that he still has right now, I think it would be a fine time to flip that. And then the Freddie Peralta trade turns into, Brandon Sproat, whatever he gives you the rest of his time here, and then whatever the return is for Jet Williams. And it's almost kind of like the Josh Hader deal where you turned Ruiz into Contreras and company, which I don't think you will get that much for Jet Williams, but maybe the A's are still out there thinking really stupidly like they have in the past.
I'm also going to put Andrew Fisher on this list for me, just because and this is probably part of it is a me thing. I just don't like prospects that whiff a lot, and he has continued to whiff a lot. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think it's been quite as bad in Double A as it was in A ball, but it is still
bit
pretty
better.
high.
It's still very high. Yeah, it's like mid 30s on the whiff, low 30s on the strikeout, versus close to 40 and then like 34, I think, on the strikeout for high A. But it is impressive, man. I don't know what to think about him because the guy just keeps hitting extra base hits every time he hits the ball. Like, it's absurd. But I'm with you. Like, he's not at the Jet Williams level for me. Like, Williams would be a lot easier for me to move than Fisher. But if I had to pick another guy from like the top 10, that would be my guy. And I think there'd be a much higher chance of that one coming back and looking pretty bad in the end than Jet Williams. But I also think there's a decent chance that it's just too much swing and miss and never really works out at the big league level. But yeah.
And I think like that's especially if there is a more substantial player to bring in. And I don't know if this is going to be the case because the front offices have gotten pretty smart. They might be seeing the same thing. But if there is an impact player out there and there is a team that is buying all the Andrew Fisher stock right now and they have that impact player available and they're willing to consider a package that either Andrew Fisher is the cornerstone or he's a very big part of the whole deal, I think you very strongly have to consider that because I don't know that his prospect stock is going to get a whole lot higher than it is right now. And again, it comes down to what do other orgs think about the whiffs. It'll probably vary from team to team. I could see Fisher already kind of being a player that's very polarizing for that reason. So it all comes down to circumstance, but I am significantly more willing to deal him than anyone just looking at the slash line and the results would be.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. I'll throw out one more name that's not technically a prospect anymore because he just made that most recent start, but I mentioned him a couple episodes ago. I do think Logan Henderson, it's not necessarily somebody that I'd be selling or doing a bunch with, but if there's a good, especially controllable player, but even like a really good rental out there, and Logan Henderson needs to be part of the deal, I could see the Brewers being at least intrigued by it because of the injury history and just not knowing how much you're going to get. It's not the talent. It's not what you get when he's on the field. Like, that has nothing to do with it, but just not trusting the health. I could see him being part of a deal for that reason and really that reason alone.
Yeah, it would definitely have to be that reason because it's pretty obvious that when he is healthy, they think that he's like their number 3 starter right now.
Yeah, and they're right.
We got another question regarding the trade deadline. Who are the top 3 pitchers you're targeting who are realistically going to be available and why? So I had to do a little bit of searching for this one because if we're talking realistically, it's actually a pretty short list. I think after mulling it over, I think that Rogers from Baltimore is the top guy that I would look at. I think it's Trevor Rogers. There's so many T. Rogers that I can never get them straight. I think it's Trevor Rogers.
Yes, it is.
His results are not good this year. In fact, they've taken a giant step back from last year, but the stuff has actually taken a step forward. He's throwing a little bit harder. He has cleaned up the pitch shapes a little bit. There's more of a distinction between the cutter and the sweeper, so he can kind of do some different things. He's a 3 fastball guy now. His stuff plus grades are pretty good and better than they have been for portions of his career. He's a rental, probably not going to cost you a ton, but who knows? Maybe, and Baltimore does have a pretty packed infield, but I do wonder if like maybe that's kind of your player who, maybe if not Jet Williams, like a Jet Williams type, you can trade him for that kind of pitcher. I think that he's got some pretty good stuff in the tank for the second half, especially if you bring him into that Brewers pitching infrastructure. So I think I would put him at number 1. We're sticking on starting pitchers. Not that I necessarily think this would be like an amazing move or anything, but Michael Wacha kind of feels like a good fit for them. Just as if you're going to go back to more like that veterans innings eater, pretty low ceiling, but a decent floor. He's been beating his peripherals for like 5 straight years now. So you know at this point, like he's doing some savvy veteran stuff that's maybe not showing up in all of the fancy numbers, but he gets it done, and that's going to play in front of this kind of team. Mixes pitches, multiple fastballs, can kind of work all areas of the strike zone. Would probably be one of Pat Murphy's favorite pitchers on the team if they acquired him. So I would put him on that list, and then for the third one, I'd probably say switching to a reliever. Antonio Senzatella is having a pretty solid year out of the bullpen in Colorado, and I would imagine there's going to be some demand for his services a little bit as the guy who everyone thinks is the sneaky good reliever, but everyone is thinking he's sneaky good at the same time. So I could actually see there being a little more demand for him. It's an interesting market this year because you are more or less limited to a couple of really bad NL teams and then the Royals and Baltimore too, because the American League just stinks this year. So like teams like the Tigers and the Mariners and even the Astros, like they're all still in the mix. So I don't know who exactly is going to be moved. I think like the Orioles are closer to the bottom of their division. The Royals are basically one of the teams that is for sure out of it. So like Wacha, Rogers, those are probably guys who are going to be a little more available, but it's probably going to not shape up so great as a buyer's market if you're looking to bring guys in, because I think a lot of teams are just going to be wanting to still make a run at this. So maybe we kind of see more of what we've seen since the playoffs got expanded, where it's the big leaguer for big leaguer kind of swap, and the Brewers do something along those lines. We'll see.
Yeah, it is an interesting market for sure. It's honestly the biggest reason I was annoyed when they went to 6 teams from each league making the playoffs. It was very clearly going to wind up looking like this in certain seasons, at least. And honestly, almost every season since they went that route, the deadline has had very few sellers because everyone thinks like, well, if we get hot, we might sneak into that third wild card. And once I'm in the playoffs, who knows? And they're right. Like if you get in the playoffs, you got a shot. So, yeah, it's tough. It makes things a lot harder to really go out and find it. The supply is a lot smaller, which means the demand is a lot higher, which means you have to pay a lot more for players that you probably don't view as game changers for your team more often than not. Is Senzatella in the last season of that extension? I'm assuming because
I want to say he is. I have to double check though.
Yeah, if he is, then I do think that's an interesting one for sure. But I think you're right that everyone probably is thinking that. Yeah, I mean, the Diamondbacks are probably going to be out of it. I remember watching that series and just seeing that every single one of their relievers was just doing pretty well this year. So maybe there's some interesting arms in that bullpen, but I think Wacha does make sense for a lot of the reasons you pointed out. Rogers is not one I had really thought about, but I do think that would make some sense. And I hadn't looked at him super closely other than I had him on my only fantasy team that I did this year. And yeah, he wasn't doing well in that regard. So I knew he had stepped back in the overall numbers, but yeah, if the peripherals and the stuff has actually ticked up a little bit, like I always liked him with Miami. I was always a fan of him. So that one would be a fun one. I think that would be probably the highest upside of all the actually available pitchers. Now, the only thing I can think of that would get interesting is if you could do a big league for big league swap of some sort with a team that has a need in a certain play. Like, I'll throw it out. I don't really think it's a thing that the Brewers would do, but we talked about Mitchell as like, if somebody's willing to go after him, maybe the Mariners decide to cut back on some of that. They're basically running a tandem starter out there right now because of how their rotation works. Like, could there be a trade that involves Mitchell for a bigger name starting pitcher from the Mariners? Not their biggest, but a decent one. Maybe. I really don't think so, but just to throw out other options, because I think if you're going to get some of the bigger names available to anybody, it's going to have to come creatively, because whoever you're trading with is probably still going to be trying to compete after the trade is made. So Yeah, it makes things tough. I'm with you. I like these questions a lot more than what would you give up for Tarek Skubal. And I mean, no offense to people can love that. I love that stuff for the NBA. I in baseball, when there's 200 people in an organization and there's so many players to try and dig through, and Jack and I are the same, where if we're going to do it, we feel like we need to do it right. So it gets hard to like just throw out a random answer and feel like it's acceptable, like, that we could just throw it out there and have random names out there and feel fine with it. And in reality, I don't think most people would probably care if we did that, but we end up having to dig into it, and we don't really want to most of the time. So if you can, like, anytime we get questions like this, we love that. But yeah, that's Waka was this. I was with you on Waka, and then the rest of it, I was kind of looking around like some bullpen guys who are on teams that are kind of starting to fade from the picture.
So I did look it up for Senzatella. This is his last guaranteed year, but he's got a club option for next year.
Okay.
However, the club option is $14 million, which is very steep for a reliever now, because he signed this extension as a starting pitcher.
Mhm.
So you could say, well, the control means the price goes up, but if the money is that high, it actually might be a situation where he may not cost as much in terms of prospect capital if you're willing to take on the money. So that's going to be an interesting one to see what he ends up going for, because I'm sure he's getting moved.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of hard to get a gauge on what the package.
Maybe they'll extend him again. It's such like
a weird financial setup for a reliever, because, like I said, he was a starting pitcher when he signed.
Yeah. It's not the same Rockies, so they won't Daniel Bard him and just extend him again for no apparent reason. But
oh man, like the Daniel Bard was such a good story. Like, really good feel-good story, but who in their right mind thought that was the guy to extend? The 38-year-old who came back from career-ending control issues just a few years ago.
I don't think I've ever seen a move more maligned by everybody on Twitter when it happened. Like, there wasn't even, I don't even think Daniel Bard's parents thought that was a good idea. That was just one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. So, and they passed up on making, like, they probably could have got pretty good value for him at that deadline. They finally seem to be running things a little bit better there. So hopefully that trends in the right direction, because they seem to have a great fan base. But yeah, if he is basically expiring and decent money, like, maybe that does make it a little bit cheaper in the prospect capital, like you said, and that would make him pretty interesting, because I think he would help a pen, and he can give you multiple innings and stuff too, because he's obviously been a starter in the past.
So we're going to move into the draft recap, and as we do, we did get a question on Twitter relating to some minor league stuff, so we'll throw this one your way. Cheesehead in QC asked, what do you think the odds are of the opening day infield for Wilson next season, including 3 18 or under players?
Yeah, I think there's a pretty decent chance of it. The DSL has had a ton of talent, and really high performance from a bunch of infielders. And I think right now, just in this class, there are 9 people who signed in the most recent class who are 17 or under and have 100 WRC plus or better with like almost even strikeout to walk ratios. So they have had a ridiculous start in the DSL to this class. And yeah, I'm curious if they'll bring a couple of them stateside right away and play them in full season ball like they did with Madej and Pena a couple of years ago. So I could see it. And Trey Ebel, who we'll talk about in a second, is almost certain to start there. And I don't think Brady will be there to start next year, but I could see them both being there this year. So yeah, I could see 2 DSL guys. I could even, Juan Martinez is 19, so he wouldn't count. So it'd have to be DSL guys. But yeah, I think I could see a world. I would not be shocked if that happens, and that would be a pretty fun infield to watch.
Well, that's a good segue. Why don't we jump into the draft recap?
Let's do it.
I'm gonna let you run through the list here, and if I have comments as we go along, I'll add them.
Fair enough. All right, we'll start with the first pick, Trey Ebel. I just mentioned him. Bit of a surprise at pick 25, I would say, by almost all accounts. He had been tied to the Brewers. He was definitely a fit for the Brewers. He has a brother who's just drafted by the Brewers. Obviously not a huge shock that he would end up with the Brewers, but in the first round was definitely a lot higher than most people were expecting him to go. If you told me the first 2 picks were Sawyer Stroh-Snyder and Trey Ebel, I would have said, okay, yeah, sounds like a good start to the draft. If you told me the order they were in, I would have been pretty surprised. So Ebel it's a little bit different profile than his brother. You're still going to get the great baseball IQ, really high instincts. They've been around the game for a long time. Their dad's a third base coach for the Dodgers. He was one for the Angels. They've been around Albert Pujols. They've been around Corey Seager, all these very good players in their primes. Well, maybe not Pujols in his prime, but a very smart baseball player in Pujols. And they've talked about those experiences. I know both of them trained with Bryce Terang as well this past offseason, so experience there. Trey Ebel has a little bit more pop than you would see from Brady at the same time coming into the draft. So during the combine, Trey Ebel maxed out at a 104.5 on exit velocity, while Brady was at just under 102. His average exit velocity was about 6 miles per hour higher than Brady Ebel's in the combine was. His 90th percentile was about 4 miles per hour higher. So like the power is more present right now than it was for Brady at the time of the draft. I think Brady's more likely to stick at shortstop in my eyes because he's got bordering on like a plus arm, and Trey has closer to above average. It's a good arm, but it'd be very good at second, and it would be totally playable at third and maybe a little bit more average for a shortstop. I think he's a little bit quicker than Brady. I think that's probably the easiest way to look at him, is just kind of how he compares to how Brady looked coming out of the draft. So Trey's got bat to ball skills that maybe are a little bit better than Brady. I think Brady might make a little bit better swing decisions, or at least did at the time. And the thing with that is Brady has very good bat to ball skills. He's not somebody who whiffs a lot, but Trey just doesn't whiff hardly at all. And it doesn't really matter the competition he's faced. That was the case on the circuit. That was the case in high school games. I know Todd Johnson mentioned on the media availability after the pick and kind of talked about how he had 9 home runs to only 6 strikeouts his senior year, which is pretty impressive no matter the level of competition. But he's playing in a very talented area of the country. Like Southern California is no joke in terms of high school competition. Anywhere in California is really not. So he did well against strong competition. I think he's probably a third baseman or a second baseman, but I think he's going to steal bases. I think he's going to have average or a little bit better hit tool, average or a little bit better power. The only thing I will say on this is that I don't know how projectable he is, even though he's only 17. He's very filled out. And I saw someone mention that like he's the shortest in his family, and at 17, like there could be height still on the horizon for him. Which could get interesting and add a little bit more to like the frame where he could add a little bit more strength still. But I do think he's pretty well filled out for a 17-year-old. And I don't know like if there's a huge ceiling here, but it's an odd thing to say for a prep guy, but it just feels like there's a pretty safe floor of a guy who's going to work his way through the minors, doing a lot of things really solidly. And if one of those tools kind of pops, especially the hit tool or the power, that's when you get a really interesting prospect. So if one of those two can really pop into like that plus territory, he'll have everything else going for him. It just feels like one of those needs to come around to being a little bit better. So if either of them do, I think that's when you get a really interesting, probably top 10 guy in the system, guy who's kind of flying up lists pretty quickly, and a guy who looks like a future major leaguer. And then if it doesn't, he looks like a guy who just is going to be on like the fringe of a big leaguer just because he does so many things well, and he's such a smart baseball player who maybe turns into a utility guy or something. And that's not something I would normally say about a prep player, but he just has so many high floor things going for him that you just don't normally see from someone this age. And then we get to pick 2, and it's basically the opposite. Sawyer Stroh-Snyder, college pick with a pretty low floor and a higher ceiling than Ebel has. He was a guy that I thought they might take at 25. He felt like a fit for the Brewers, and I'll get into some of it in a second because I have a theory, Jack, and I'd like to run it by you at one point and see what you think. But I'll go through a little bit of some of the other stuff first. So the raw tools are very big. Like there's legitimate plus raw power. He hit 115 game exit velocities this year at TCU. Even with the metal bat, and you expect that to trend down a little bit, that's still big time power. That's in like the 95th percentile for college baseball. It's big power. He's probably a plus runner. He's very fast. He's a very good athlete. Arm strength is pretty close to plus as well. Defensively, definitely needs some work on the routes and the jumps and everything else. TCU played him in right field rather than center, which for a guy with plus speed, that usually says a little bit of something about the defense, though they did have another like fringe first rounder in Chase Brunson who was out in center. So you could argue that maybe that would be a big part of why he ended up there. But still, it is a little bit of a concern, I think, of how the defense is going to play out in pro ball. The Brewers have been pretty good at developing some of the outfield routes and jumps and everything over time. And a guy like Josiah Ragsdale had similar concerns last year, and now he looks like an above average center fielder already. So there's a very good chance they figure that out pretty quickly, but it is still a bit of a concern. Here's where it gets interesting. I'll say this first. I think the bat to ball is a little bit better than consensus seems to say. I don't think bat to ball is the biggest issue here. I think he has very, very poor swing decisions right now. They're very bad. They are not good. He was 5th percentile in chase rate for the Big 12. It's a lot of out of zone swings. He doesn't make terrible contact in terms of like being able to get to the ball out of the zone. In zone swing or whiff rates are a little bit higher than I'd like to see them, but they're about average for the Big 12. Like that was about where he hovered on a lot of the whiff stuff, but the chase was a problem. When he gets into pro ball, he'll probably whiff more on pitches that are out of the zone than he was in college. So they're going to have to clean up the swing decisions. I will say that is something the Brewers have been, if I were to give them one thing that's probably been one of their biggest strengths as a organization, I still think that's it. Like, I think they do a good job of cleaning up swing decisions, even if some of it is just let's swing less, let's see the ball deeper, any of that stuff. They seem to be pretty good in that regard. Where I'm curious on what you think of this theory, Jack, is he didn't pull the ball in the air very well, but he did show some pretty legitimate opposite field power. And we've talked about it with like Bryce Terang. We talked about it with David Hamilton. That's something where, not that David Hamilton has a ton of oppo power, but the fact that they want him to see the ball deep and that maybe there will be some extra base hit power and stuff to left center for him. I think Stroh-Snyder can hit home runs like Terang does. I wonder if the Brewers view it as, one, they're already pretty decent at developing swing decisions in general. But two, if this is a guy that they can teach to just let the ball travel and trust that he can still drive it to the opposite field, that might help with the swing decisions as he gets into pro ball, with seeing it deeper on purpose and knowing that he can still impact the ball the other way. I just wonder if they feel like all of that is kind of a fit with what they do, and like the negatives that he has are things that they're pretty good at cleaning up. And I just feel like, because there's a high ceiling here, and if they can figure out some of these negatives and the fact that it feels like a lot of them line up with what they do well. Do you kind of get where I'm going with it? Like the fact that he has that oppo power potentially helping with the swing decisions and tying it all together. Like, I'm just curious. You wouldn't know, obviously, but in my mind, I wonder if the Brewers view that as kind of a good match for what they do and think that that's maybe a route they can take to teach him to just purposely let the ball travel a little bit more, see it deeper, and then hit most of the hardest hit balls in the air to that opposite field by doing so.
So Murph made a comment a few weeks ago when he was asked about Bryce's opposite field power, and basically said that they know, based on the way his body moves and kind of the way he drifts toward the ball a little bit, they know that his bat is naturally going to come through the zone geared toward going the other way. So it does seem like the whole wanting him to work behind the ball, they always talk about how they want him to work behind the ball, see it deep, do all that kind of stuff. And they think that he's going to be best when he does that. You can obviously just make the point of like, well, you're going to make your best swing decisions when you see the ball deep, because it just gives you more time to it delays your
Yeah.
decision point ever so slightly, and that can be the difference between, chasing a breaking ball out in front versus seeing it a little longer and you lay off of it. But I do wonder if there is a little bit of a deeper layer to it of we actually know that the way that he moves, there's even more to it where like he can still hit the ball really hard and he can actually make some of his best contact when he's working behind it and going the other way a little bit. So he, like I said, he did kind of touch on it a little bit with that's the way that Bryce's body and the way that Bryce's swing
Right.
are wired a little bit. So I it would not shock me if they were seeing something similar here and they kind of lean into the opposite field power with some guys. Like if you find a guy like this where
Right.
he can do it and it's kind of the best of both worlds a little bit, where it can be see the ball deep, make the good swing decisions, and that's also going to kind of play into where you can drive the ball anyway, just based on the way your swing works.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting to follow him when he first, really not this year, probably when he gets in the Pro Bowl, but next year when he really is in a full season of Pro Ball, just kind of seeing what the approach is, seeing if the power is showing more to the opposite field, because I think if that is the case early on, that I'll probably pretty quickly start to believe that that's kind of the approach they're trying to take with him. And it'll be interesting to follow that. But we can move to the next guy, another college outfielder, Kyle Jones out of Florida. Wasn't super high on him coming into the draft as I was doing my research. I did kind of miss that he had not played in all of 2025, essentially because of a labrum injury to not his throwing arm, his left arm. He was making a diving catch and he got a pretty significant shoulder injury in the process. But that is his lead arm and his swing. So it could have something to do with a little bit of the lack of power that he's shown so far. Very, very good athlete, plus runner, could be a plus defender in center field. 6'3", definitely has some room to add some weight. But like I said, the power hasn't really been there. He's shown some feel for pulling the ball in the air. Not a ton so far in terms of even just like extra base hits to that side, but he has some feel for it. If they think they can add some juice to the bat, it gets interesting. The end zone whiff rates, they're not. Everyone's talked about like he had a 90% or 90th. No, he had a 90% contact rate on in zone pitches. But in college baseball, that was like 75th percentile. So it sounds really good, but it's not crazy in the context of it. But the exit velocities went up this year. There were more whiffs, more strikeouts, but it was still in a good place. This is one that I'm curious to see what they do when they get him pro ball. Can they add some power? Do they encourage him to go back to more of like we're going to be a hit tool guy, we're going to be speed, defense, and get on base? I don't know. Josiah Ragsdale, I keep using him as the example, but he was another guy I did not expect power this year, and there's been quite a bit of power. He's been up to 111 on exit velos, and he maxed out at 108 with metal last year, and he was maxing out in BP at like 104. So some of this power, they found it quickly with some of these guys. So if they find it with Jones, like he's a great athlete with good defense and center, if the power is there, it gets interesting quick. If not, then they're going to have to develop at least an average hit tool and see where it goes from there. But to me, it's not like a super high ceiling here, but it's not a crazy low floor either because of the defense and the athleticism and the fact that he does a lot of stuff that the Brewers like in terms of base running and defense. My guess is he's an underslot guy. We didn't really talk about that with Ebel or Stroh-Snyder. Ebel, I would guess, goes underslot. Stroh-Snyder, I would guess, almost takes up the exact amount that Ebel goes underslot in overslot, and they even out to about what the first two picks were in slot value. I would guess Jones is a little underslot here. I don't know if you've got anything on Jones you'd like to add before we get to, I think, my favorite pitcher in this draft for the Brewers. I'm pumped about this pick. This is going to be the pick.
There's some upside with this. There's some upside with this.
I really like Julian Garcia. Long Beach State commit from St. John Bosco, which is a very, very famous athletic school in California. I think largely known for football, but it's a very good school for athletics. There is some really good stuff here. So he's up to 97 already on the fastball. He'll sit more like 92 94. But the induced vertical break can get up close to 20 inches, about 18, 19 inches on average. He spins it at 2,500 RPM, so he's got pretty good feel for spin on a fastball. The curveball is a banger of a curveball. It is 3,000 RPMs, straight down 12.6 type of movement. He commands it really well for a high school arm. Like, he can throw it in the zone. He can put it, right behind the plate for a chase pitch whenever he pretty much wants to. It's an impressive pitch. It's a really, really good pitch that I think he can throw to righties. He can throw to lefties. He's got a 2-pitch mix there that I think plays really well. North, south, off each other, like, can be really good together. He also mixes in, as the season went on, he started to mix in a mid-80s slider. Get a little cutterish at times on the shape, but it's an interesting pitch. He spins it well again. The thing I like the most about him, though, is high school pitchers who are good rarely need a third pitch, right? Like, they're normally going to have 2 very good pitches, and that's all they need to get through games. And for Garcia, that was the case. But when he did show his changeup, I think his changeup has a chance to be a legitimate, like, plus type of pitch as well. He kills the spin on it. He kills the velo on it. He gets good fade. He gets good depth. I think there's really high upside in the changeup, which means I think there's a chance that you could argue future grades on the fastball, curveball, and changeup could all be pretty close to 60 and plus pitches. And that the slider can be a decent fourth offering. And the fact that he got kind of cutterish with it, I wonder if they could even turn it into 2 different pitches there, a cutter and a slider. Maybe something a little bit more sweepery, shorter sweeper with a cutter involved too. I'm not sure exactly the direction they'll go, but I can envision a 5-pitch mix here where 3 are potentially plus. Just to break down what he did in the playoffs in California this year, because it was pretty ridiculous. His first outing, he faced a very good school. He threw 8 no-hit innings with 11 strikeouts, only walked 1. Obviously, there's our 7-inning games. Their team did not score. It ended up going 11 innings, but his team did win. But 8 no-hit innings, only 1 walk, and 11 strikeouts in the first game. In the next game, he threw a complete game with 13 strikeouts. He did give up 2 runs on 4 hits. But still, obviously, a very, very impressive game in the, I don't think it was the semifinal, but it was the game to go to, like, the semifinal for the state tournament. And California splits it into North and South California. It doesn't really matter, but just to be clear on that. So in the Southern section state championship, he faced a Norco lineup that the leadoff hitter is the projected 1-1 pick in next year's draft, Dylan Seward. Baseball America put out their top 10 for their projected way too early 2027 mock draft the other day. Dylan Seward went number 1. Julian Garcia struck him out 3 times on 11 pitches in that game. Just absolutely demolished him. Blew stuff by him. I saw some of the video of it. Seward looked lost, and this is, again, a guy who might go number 1 overall in next year's draft. The rest of that lineup is filled with D1 guys. The second hitter in the lineup hit a double, so strikes out Seward, gives up a double, and then he struck out 13 more and retired the next 20 batters and threw a complete game shutout against a loaded lineup with D1 future pros, and he did it on 86 pitches for 14 strikeouts. I mean, just dominated them. And I watched pretty much the whole video of it on YouTube. He has this presence on the mound. He is very confident, but he's not, like, over the top and showing emotion or doing any of that stuff. Like, he has almost everything that you could look for in a prep pitcher. And he had Tommy John in 2024. He came back from it, obviously missed all of 2025 during, like, the circuit where most players get the most attention in the draft. Is like that summer before your draft year. So maybe that played a role in this, but I just cannot, and no offense to Long Beach State, who's been a very solid baseball program, but I don't know how that was where he was committed to. And the more I look into him, like, I just don't know how he was not ranked higher on draft boards. And there is some risk. I think it's a pretty violent delivery, and he does have the Tommy John in the history. So that may have played a role here, that maybe there's risk. People are worried about injury, but for a prep arm, he was hitting 94 in the 7th inning of this complete game shutout, sitting 92, 94 that whole time, never dropped below 92 from what I heard. Like, it's just, there's so much here. And the metrics on the pitches are good. He has this just really good confidence on the mound. I think he's still got projection left in the body, even though he's got really broad shoulders, even though he's already pretty well built. I think he can add more. Like, I don't know, man. If you told me this guy's the best player in the Brewers class within 2 years from now, like, I wouldn't be shocked in the slightest. I think there's a good chance that he'll be one of their better pitching prospects within a couple of years. I really do. I can't remember the last time I was this excited about a guy that I know is going to sign for the Brewers in this draft. And Lavonis would have been the other one, but he did not sign. And he was also in the top 10 for that next year's mock draft, by the way. So he definitely bet on himself, and it looks like he's going to win. So good for him. But yeah, I'm pumped about this pick, Jack. I don't know how much you know about him, but I really love this one.
So anytime you have a guy who can not only throw hard, but can also spin the baseball and manipulate the baseball in a couple different ways, that's obviously a pretty good starting point. And we talk a lot about how, most guys are going to be locked into, they're going to supinate better or they're going to pronate better. So it is kind of rare to find pitchers who can both spin a breaking ball and can throw a good fading changeup like that. The one thing that I am curious about, and maybe this is where he got overlooked a little bit for this reason, it is a pretty big velo drop from both the fastball and the changeup to also the fastball and the breaking ball, at least from what I've seen. And I do wonder if that's kind of like the one missing piece where it's like at the high school level, like, yeah, if you're just in high school, if you're killing the velo like that with the same arm action, like that's going to be enough to dice a lot of guys up. But I do wonder if at a higher level, both college and getting into pro ball, assuming he signs, if there is a little bit of a gap there in the arsenal of we need something that's a little bit closer in velo to the fastball instead of going from like mid to upper 90s to low to mid 80s or mid 70s. And maybe that means a cutter. I don't know. I haven't looked at like more specifically like how his hand works with how he can spin the ball. But if he's got the ability to manipulate both for a changeup and for a high spin breaking ball, I would imagine he can probably throw a cutter. In a way, this is almost kind of like Craig Yoho on steroids a little bit even like the build too, like Craig Yoho's kind of like was always a bigger dude too with the broad shoulders and stuff. Obviously it was never the kind of fastball velo that you're seeing here. And Yoho's not like a crazy high spin fastball guy either. So that we got to point that out too. So I think it's probably even more upside in the stuff than what Craig Yoho had, but it is kind of that similar thing of, okay, is he going to need something that could be a little bit more of a bridge because is he going to run into problems as he gets to higher levels of like now guys can actually differentiate pretty well between the hard stuff and the soft stuff, and that enables them to lay off of certain pitches or maybe have a better approach or eliminate certain pitches or kind of wait them out in certain ways. So that's kind of what I'm curious about. Are they going to try to add just something in there that's a little bit harder, something like a cutter, not because the breaking ball is bad, but just because it's so much slower than the fastball that there just needs to be a bridge.
Yeah, I think that would make sense. I can't remember if it was about him for sure, but I think it was. I believe Todd Johnson talked about how they felt like they could add to the repertoire too. So my guess would be something in that range is what they would be thinking is a cutter or a harder short slider or something that's in that like upper 80s range. Yeah, that would definitely make sense. And I do think if he doesn't add something like that, it does become maybe he's more of a relief type where you have to let it play up in shorter outings. But given what he can do with the ball, like it does feel like he's got a pretty good chance to add whatever pitches they might need, even if it's not a great pitch on its own and it is more of a bridge pitch, like that can still be valuable too. So yeah, I'm very excited about that one. We'll talk about another arm or two here. Aiden Knack from Clemson. This was a guy who had pretty high hopes after his freshman year. I think he was a freshman All-American, or he was very close to being one. He started all 3 years at Clemson. Clemson has turned from a really high-profile program to a team that's kind of known for not developing players very well at this point, and Knack kind of followed that train. Like he really got worse every year. He gave up louder contact. He gave up more contact. The thing Knack has going for him is he basically throws like Logan Henderson's changeup. And it's like it's already a plus pitch that would probably play if just thrown into some other pitcher's repertoire at the major league level. Like it's a very, very good changeup. The rest of it is interesting. The four seam, it's kind of what we talked about with Gordon earlier. Like it's got decent carry on it. It'll be like 19 inches of carry, but the vertical approach angle is basically -5 degrees. He throws it from a 6-foot release height. The arm slot is pretty normal stock arm slot. And the four seam just kind of gets crushed unless he puts it at the top of the zone. That's pretty much the only place it doesn't get crushed. The slider and curveball shapes aren't the worst, but he does not have feel for spin on either of them. Like they'll both spin under 2,000 RPMs. And the issue he ran into in college is that nobody chased him. He could land him in the zone really well, but nobody chased him because it just becomes too easy to recognize it when there's such little spin on it. Like hitters just saw it out of the hand well, and if it was starting in the zone, they pretty much knew not to swing at it. Like it wasn't going to be something they had to worry about. So I know he is during the offseason this year, he's been working on adding like more of a slurvy breaking ball, more of a gyro in terms of the slider, getting it closer to like that 0-0 on induced vertical break and horizontal. I think his thought process is that the more breaking balls he has in the bag, that maybe it makes it harder, even if they can see it's a breaking ball, to figure out which one is which. I'm not sure how that'll work exactly, but I think there can at least be a little logic to it. I know he's working on a two seam as well, and mentioned that he had worked a cutter in a little bit too. So he's trying to really make it a deep mix, but I think the changeup's the carrying tool here. He throws a lot of strikes. I think they're going to have to figure out the breaking balls, or it's just a guy who he could be a reliever with the changeup, and you just use it as maybe it's Tommy Conley or something. Like he's just a ton of changeups all the time. But right now, I think the rest of the repertoire is where it's just there's going to need to be a lot of tinkering and a lot of improvement, and maybe they can do it. I'm not saying they can't. There is arm talent there, and again, my guess is he didn't get much help over the last 3 years in terms of development. So maybe there's a few simple fixes with releases or something that can help him, but I don't know if you've looked into him much. He's an interesting guy because I think that changeup's legitimately like could be a 70 pitch at some point. Like it's a really good pitch. He mixes velo, he mixes shape, but the rest of it is there seems like there's a lot to work on the rest of it.
I think he's even more likely than Garcia to add like a big time cutter that he throws a lot. I mean, Todd Johnson threw like the Logan Henderson comp on him. That's basically what they've done with Logan Henderson once he got to the big leagues. It was cutters. Just to like cutters instead of trying to throw these low spin breaking balls, basically, is what it was. So I would guess that's kind of where they go with him. Like it wouldn't be a good cutter, but it would at least be something that actually gets some swings and maybe gets guys off the other pitches, because that kind of has been the case for Logan Henderson, where it was, when he had the shorter one, it wasn't great. He's got the bigger one now, but it's still low spin. He doesn't command it great. Like cutter just kind of ended up being the way to go, and would not be shocked if he follows kind of a similar path here.
Yeah, I think the only thing that the difference here is that Henderson's fastball is a very, very good shape on its own too, and it's got good carry, it's got a good vertical approach angle, it's got that much lower release height, so he at least had that going for him too. I think right now you'd be looking for one playable fastball from Knack by adding that rather than even just a bridge pitch. But there's plenty of time to tinker with it, and when you have a plus pitch to start with, that's never a bad thing. So Ryan Oshinsky, will move to him, 6th round pick. We'll go a little bit quicker now. Interesting arm, also a very good changeup. Brown University arm, did really, really well on the Cape Cod League last year. 28 innings, 1.93 ERA with 38 strikeouts to 8 walks. He did have Tommy John surgery. I believe it happened this spring. But the four seam has kind of a weird, rare shape where it's got a lot of arm side run, but also like decent carry. If you saw it on like the plot, I put it on Patreon today, but there's a plot on overslot baseball that shows like compared to where everyone else is in college baseball. And it's kind of an outlier shape. I don't know that it's a great shape, but it's not one that's very common, at least. So it's an interesting fastball, I'll say. He'll get into the mid 90s with it. The changeup can get up to 20 inches of arm side run. It can get pretty close to zero on induced vertical break. Like, it can be a pretty interesting pitch. He also, unlike Knack, though, shows an ability to spin two different breaking balls. He's got a curveball with depth, spins that around 2,600 RPMs, sliders around 2,500 RPMs. That's more short, a little more glove side. He mixed in some cutters, but they were more like gyro sliders, it looked like, in terms of the shape. I wonder if he's another guy who, like, a cutter would make a lot of sense for. I think he probably is. But the command came around. He looked better. He was expected to move from the pen at Brown into the rotation this year before he had Tommy John. But it reminds me of Sean Episcope last year, like a talented arm with a bunch of ability to get a bunch of different shapes, but coming off Tommy John and probably going to be a little bit before we see him in professional games. But interesting. I don't know if you looked into Oshinsky at all, but he's an interesting arm for me that if I were ranking them, like, I'd put Knack or I'd put him ahead of Knack right now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't have a whole lot to add on that. The only thing I'm going to tell you, and it's going to make you upset, is you have to pick 5, and those are the 5 you can talk about for the rest of the show.
That's ridiculous. You should have told me this earlier. Fine.
Before we started, I believe you commented to me that, we were going to go in depth on the first 5, and then we were going to go quicker.
And we just got to the 6th one. That was the first one. That was less than a minute on Oshinsky. Fine. All right. Okay, I'm at least reading the names. So Grant Hill was the 7th round pick. He's not the NBA legend. He is a baseball player who's 17 years old. Interesting right-handed arm going to Grand Canyon. Is it okay if I do that, or committed to Grand Canyon? That's where I'm going to go.
That's
all right.
Fine.
Kellen Tom, first baseman from Arizona. He was the Prep Baseball Player of the Year in Arizona this year. Exit velo is up to 110 already. Some oppo power. Arizona State commit. He's already one of the guys who's officially signed. We just don't have a number on him. I want to talk about the 9th round pick, Chase Mora, Texas State. The all-time home run leader for Texas State. He broke Paul Goldschmidt's record there. He had a 1035 OPS as a freshman there. And the Brewers drafted him as a pitcher. Todd Johnson mentioned it in the rundown a little bit, but I'm going to butcher the area scout's name because it is full of consonants without enough vowels where they should be, I feel like. But Craig Samajstrala, I believe, is the Texas. He covers at least this area of Texas as the area scout. And he stayed around in a 19-3 game to watch the whole game. And Chase Mora, who had not thrown but 1/3 of an inning in his college career to that point, came in, pitched 1 inning, touched close to 98, showed really good spin and really good feel for a breaking ball. And they kind of bookmarked that. There was only like one other scout in the stand, I think they mentioned, and just viewed it as like, he's a senior sign. He might be a really interesting like athlete to draft as a pitcher in the 9th round. Obviously they weren't that specific when they were thinking about it, but he was a two-way going into college. He decided, after having Tommy John and then having a 1035 OPS as a freshman, Texas State said, okay, you're way too important to us as a hitter. We're going to just kind of not do the pitching thing in college. But he didn't hit as well the rest of his career. Kind of went downhill every year. It just wasn't as good. He still hit for some power, but the overall numbers weren't there. So it's a really interesting pick to me. Like, I wouldn't expect a ton to come out of this, but anyone who was throwing upper 90s who, without really knowing what they're doing and not pitching much for the last few years, and shows feel for a spin and was originally a pitcher, I think it's a really fun pick for a senior sign, and somebody that, to be honest, Craig Yoho had only been a pitcher for 1 year when they drafted him as a senior sign. Like, maybe they're viewing this as like, oh, it's a year before that, but we're going to get him before he gets that year of pitching under his belt and see what happens in pro ball. So this is a fun one just because it's going to be really interesting to see how it goes. I genuinely have no clue how it's going to go. I would guess the Brewers have no clue how it's going to go, but they see a talented arm that they could get for pennies on the dollar here, who frankly doesn't have like a lot of workload on his record either. Like there's a guy who has kind of a healthy young arm, despite the Tommy John in the history. But after that, it's like 4 years of no pitching. This is interesting to me, Jack. I don't know if you have anything to add on him, but this is one of my like favorite, just random picks because it's fun. Nothing to add. You don't care about
that,
the pitcher?
but that was your 1 out of 5. That's what I have to add.
I know. I'm aware of that. I said I was going to focus on him. Andrew Gaines, 10th round pick out of St. Joseph's. Went to a bunch of different schools. Interesting fastball, good vertical approach angle. Command is definitely an issue for him. Gavin Perry out of Western Kentucky. Reminds me a little bit of Braylon Owens from last year's draft. He's a big dude, doesn't throw super hard, but super competitive on the mound. Marcus Cruzan from Minnesota. Can I tell a non-baseball thing with it? I don't care. Rogers Realm. If you're aware of the Rogers Realm account, which Jack, I don't know if you are, but he's the guy who impersonates Aaron Rodgers.
I've seen it. Yeah.
So Marcus Cruzan is like his best friend, and he's in a bunch of the videos. So that was kind of a fun connection. And he was a 12th round pick. So the guy made a video, the Rogers Realm guy made a video and said, you would think there'd be like some full circle moment here. And no, he texted me and he goes, dude, 12th round for Raj. So that's a fun connection. Interesting guy though, like 7 feet of extension, sits in the low to mid 90s with good carry on the fastball. Like somebody comped him to John Hollabetz to me when I was asking around about him. So he's turned into a pretty interesting pitching prospect after they traded him to Boston. But interesting guy there and a cool story. Carson Hart, another Minnesota guy, but a high schooler, very, very fast, 6'2", 60-yard dash. Some concerns about whether he's a true baseball player, just a really good athlete, but an interesting pick there and definitely a talented dude. Creighton commit could be a tougher sign. 14th rounder, Dante Bell. I'm going to focus on him a little bit because he is a California kid, Houston commit. I think this is a super interesting, projectable pitcher at this point in the draft. He sits in the mid to upper 80s right now, touch 91. He's listed at 6'3", 175. When I see video and pictures of him, I would guess he weighs like 30 pounds less than that. He is very, very skinny. I think there's a ton of room to put on weight, but he throws a legitimate 5-pitch mix already. You got a cutter, bigger slider, a curveball, pretty good feel for a changeup. Again, the fastball shape is pretty good, but it's mid to upper 80s, maybe touching low 90s right now. But with that much room to put on a bunch of weight and a 5-pitch mix from the left side, I'm really interested in this one. I think this is one where I'd personally probably throw out the biggest bonus offer of all the 11 through 20 guys. Like, I think there is the most upside of anybody in this group is Dante Bell. I have no idea how signable he is. He's a Houston commit. That's a pretty good school and a school that has decent NIL money, I know. So perhaps he's not super signable, but of all the guys, I'm pretty interested in him. I think there's a lot to go with. And if he adds weight and adds velo, it could all come together pretty quickly for him. 15th round pick, Keaton Mayorna. He's from Colorado, a Colorado high school, committed to Minnesota. Interestingly, he was the number 43 player by PBR in the state of Colorado, which is not exactly a baseball hotbed. But he was up to 96 this year. He spins a sweeper at 3,000 RPMs. Interesting arm. We'll see where they go with that one. I genuinely have no idea what he's looking at. He committed to UNLV for a long time, flipped it to Minnesota about a month before the draft. So no idea what the outlook is for him signing, but interesting arm. The 16th rounder, Braden Havard. This is an interesting one I'm going to talk about a little more. Community college commit, Pearl River Community College. He's from Mississippi, had a tremendous season in prep ball for the state of Mississippi. Struck out 134 batters in 75 and a third innings, 1.3 ERA. He sits around 88 to 90, but he'll get up to 93 at times with pretty good arm side run. He was working with Tread this past winter. I know that. So there's some good video on Twitter of him working with them. He has a curveball. He has a slider. He's got a pretty decent changeup. I think the slider is the best pitch right now. I think it's probably the one he has the best feel for. Seems to be the one he wants to go to when he wants to strike out. But a community college commitment is weird, interesting. In terms of the arm talent, he looks like a D1 guy right now to me. And he's been committed to the community college for, I think it was in winter this past season. So it's interesting. I'm curious if he might just be signable because maybe he's not a huge fan of school. I have no idea. Like maybe he didn't have great grades. Maybe that's why he ended up there. I really don't know. But I'm curious how signable he is because he's interesting to me. I like that arm. The next two are the final two I'll go in depth on. Chance Ruby, round 17. He is a Wilmot, Wisconsin native, UIC commit. Really interesting guy. I know Vinny Rotino loves this kid. He's talked about on the PBR account. There was a video that came out of him talking about him from like February. It was one of his favorite players to ever come through the state as a prep. Just really high instincts, really good baseball IQ, a guy who just knows what he's doing on the field, but also has some pretty good skills. Like he has numerous balls hitting the 100 to 105 mile per hour range. He's still very young, obviously. I've seen video of him catching up to upper 90s fastballs in live AB settings and turning them around so he can handle velocity at his age. He ran a sub 6.6 in the 60-yard dash, so he's a pretty good athlete, pretty fast. I like the hands and the swing at the plate. I think sometimes he gets a little Joey Weimer-like with the movement, not quite to the Joey Weimer level of hand movement. It's hard to get that far, but just a little more movement than I'd like to see at times. I don't know that the glove sticks at shortstop, but the arm is strong enough to handle it if he can improve some of the other stuff. I think he's a good second baseman or third baseman and could handle outfield if he needs to. He just gives me like right-handed Josh Adamszewski vibes. And Ginger Polson was the scout for both of them. It just gives me that type of like this kid could end up being somebody that all of a sudden in a couple of years, like, whoa, where did they get this guy from? And it's a UIC commit, won't be a tough sign. He is a huge Brewer fan. He's already went on the radio and said that he'll be signing with the Brewers. So he will be signing, I believe, over the weekend, and we'll see what that number comes in at. But I would imagine it won't be anything too crazy. The 18th round pick, I need to talk about him partially because of this stuff, but also because I think he had my favorite interview I've ever seen from a guy who's just drafted, especially in the 18th round. Brady Smith out of a Missouri high school. He was a Wichita State commit, also has already committed to signing, did so about 5 minutes after the draft pick was in. Had a local newscaster with him at his house or some park or something, wherever they were, and did an interview right after. And multiple times during that interview, he talked about how he was coming for Jacob Misiorowski. So the kid does not lack confidence. It was an electric interview. I encourage you all to go watch it, where he committed to signing and he committed to coming for Jacob Misiorowski. So he did it multiple times. It was great. But in terms of the stuff, like, I think, again, he's a lanky guy with room to add some weight and some velocity. He already sits in the low 90s. He'll touch 94 in some of the showcase settings. I don't know where he's gotten up to in game. The fastball shape itself isn't great right now, but looking at a lot of the stuff, I just wonder if there might be a sinker that he is going to end up throwing here, because he'll get pretty decent run and a little bit more sink on it at times, and I think he's doing that while throwing a four seam because it seems like that's what they've been classified as. So I'm curious if they switch the grip, if he might just kind of lean into a sinker in pro ball. The slider is a decent pitch. It's a pretty stock shape, and it's got like 2,300 RPMs. It's not anything crazy. He'll probably want to throw it a little bit harder in pro ball, but the changeup is the one that's the most interesting. He'll get up to 22 inches of run on it at times, and he can get close to 0 inches of induced vertical break on it at times too. I don't necessarily think those are on the exact same pitches. That's kind of like the best version of the pitch at times for both odds or ends of the spectrum. But I think there's a lot of potential in that pitch. And again, he's already going to be signing. We know that, but a confident kid, he's signing, interesting enough stuff, and definitely projectable too. So he'll be a fun one to follow. Sam George was the 19th round pick out of Minnesota State Mankato at D2, who was committed to transfer to Iowa. Not a long story, but he's another Brewer fan, and he's from Iowa, a rare Iowa Brewer fan. Didn't grow up a Cubs fan or a Cardinals fan. They almost all do, but his family is Brewer fans. So that's a cool story. He's going to be signing as well. But interesting mix, did very well at the D2 level and was committed to a pretty good pitching school in Iowa. So something there. And then obviously the last pick was Karsten Sabathia, CC's son, from Houston. Not a pitcher, a lot of raw power, hasn't had a ton of success at the college level, but a cool pick. Hit a ball 111 in the MLB draft league, though the 43 plate appearances didn't have great results, but a cool pick in terms of the family connections and the fact that he does have big raw power, and maybe there's something that comes of it at some point. But I would guess it's more in line with what we just talked about with Jaden Fielder earlier. A kid who works hard, does a lot of good things on the field, has a good understanding of how baseball works, but maybe just doesn't quite have the overall talent to make a real run at being a big leaguer. But a cool story and somebody to have in the organization. So that's all of them. Hopefully that was fine, and that kept us to the 2-hour mark, Jack. So I hope we're all happy with it.
Yes.
Good.
I just didn't want you to get too redundant because I know you've done plenty of coverage on this.
Yes,
so
I have. Yes, I do appreciate that.
Yes, people can find it already in a couple of different areas, including the area where they can actually, pay to see this stuff. So I don't want you giving away all your secrets for free.
No, I do appreciate that. I haven't even dug in. I've only gotten through the first 6 picks in terms of like really diving in. So we'll see where we go on Backfield Brew there.
We're just making sure.
I appreciate that. I do. Yes. There's one question that I'll answer quick from Sprawl 135. Which 11 through 20 round guy is your favorite? I'm going with Chance Ruby because I know he's signing, and I really do like him a lot. But if Dante Bell signs, he would be my answer.
There you go. Draft recap. So you said you appreciated me trying to not allow you to overlap on coverage too much here. Well, we appreciate everybody who takes the time out of their busy schedules to listen to us for 2 hours every week. Draft season is always a fun time to kind of like step back from everything that's going on at the big league level and just kind of dream on some guys a little bit. I do like this stuff. I know I make fun of you for it a lot with how in depth you go, but I think I was just so tired from doing big league coverage this year that I just did not like follow the draft live as much as I may have in past years. But you can find good stuff here from Spencer. You can find it in write-ups at Brewer Fanatic. You can find it at Backfield Brew as he's going through and doing all of the picks in a little more detail. So plenty of good stuff to consume there on that front. We're going to be getting back into more intense big league coverage, though, because the Brewers begin a 10-game homestand on Friday night. The stretch run is coming up. Trade deadline's coming up. Things are going to get very interesting here when it comes to Brewers baseball, and we will have all of the action, all of the analysis, all of the takeaways on the Brewer Fanatic podcast. Thank you for listening. You'll hear from us in 1 week.